Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Sunday the 27th of February and this is the Full Scottish. I'm Andrew Wilson and welcome to our studios in Glasgow. This afternoon we'll have a brief coronavirus update for you, which we now do every Sunday afternoon, and then we'll introduce our two fantastic guests for this afternoon, and together we will discuss predominantly the events that are continuing to unfold following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The coronavirus status as at 2 p.m. on Friday was that in the past week, 41,959 new COVID-19 cases have been confirmed in Scotland either by a lateral flow or PCR test. In the past week, there have been 74 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive for COVID in the previous 28 days. 4,434,404 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination. 4,154,924 have received their second dose, and 3,419,928 have received a third dose or booster. 1,093 people were in hospital last night with recently confirmed COVID-19, 11 of whom were in intensive care. And since the start of the pandemics in the UK, a total of 10,600, in Scotland, a total of 10,656 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died. Now, this afternoon, as I say, we're lucky enough to be joined by two fantastic guests. Firstly, we're joined by Sandra White, who is a retired SNP politician. Sandra became the list MSP for Glasgow in 1999 and then the constituency MSP for Glasgow Kelvin in 2011. And Sandra continued to represent the constituency until the election in May last year, when she was lucky enough to take a retirement. Sandra, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Andrew. I'm fine and looking forward to an updated discussion with Iuliia and obviously our thoughts are with the people in Ukraine.
They absolutely are. Thank you for joining us today, Sandra. And as Sandra says, we're also joined lucky enough to be joined this afternoon by Iuliia Mendel. Iuliia was appointed press secretary by President Volodymyr Zelensky on the 30th of April 2019, having won a public competition against 4,000 other competitors for the job, I'm bound to say. And she now is working as a journalist and writer. Iuliia, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for talking about this important topic, because Ukraine needs the world to hear its story now.
Well, thank you for Iuliia. It's a pleasure to be hosting you and to have you with us this afternoon. We have been talking about nothing else, largely other than the events that are unfolding in Ukraine since for several days now in Broadcasting Scotland, and that's not going to change until we begin to see peace. And we begin to see appropriate outcomes for Ukraine and for the people of Ukraine, who, as Sandra says, are in our minds all of the time at the moment.
This means the world for us.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. On one analysis, Scotland and Ukraine are very different. Sandra and I live in a very small, formerly maritime country, far out on the edge of the North Atlantic, far out on the edge of the known world. Whereas Ukraine lies in the very heart of Europe, close to Asia, a traditional trade route and a cultural centre for thousands of years. And Ukraine has perhaps almost 10 times the population and 10 times the area of Scotland. But it's also struck me that then again there are similarities. Both countries are led by law graduates who decided that they would then pursue different careers. Both countries have found ourselves at the mercy of neighbouring nations and their political ambitions, and both nations have had to deal with difficult and dominating much larger neighbours who have a history of malign and brutal violence towards us. So maybe we're not so different, in fact. We're maybe 2,000 kilometres apart, but we certainly understand. And so this afternoon, I was hoping that we would look at the situation as it currently exists in Ukraine, in the UK, with the EU and with NATO, and then perhaps we would look at what may be happening next, where events may go from here, and if we have a little time, there is one Scottish news item that we might talk about at the end if time permits. However, firstly, Iuliia, I'll come to you. You're in Western Ukraine at the moment, and so it's the afternoon with you. It's just arrived the afternoon here after, I'm sure, what has been another difficult night for you and people in Ukraine. Who are you thinking about this morning? What's on your mind?
Actually, I hardly see any Ukrainian right now who can sleep at night. We've been on road for 40 hours. It doesn't make any sense because it usually takes around 7 hours to get from one city to another, but the traffic is very difficult. First, it's very difficult because there are people who want to go to the west to keep safe, but the second is that some roads sometimes are closed because we have military equipment going to the capital to help the capital defend, and it comes to Kiev from different parts and from the west too. But we hardly slept again at night. We are full of adrenaline, of course, and it doesn't matter like where, in which part of the country you are. My family is in Kherson region because I am myself originally from Kherson, the city which is in the south of the country. This is the only region that is bordering the peninsula Crimea that Russia annexed 8 years ago. And the situation in this region is the most difficult these days, one of the most difficult. Because if we hear that Kyiv is under control of Ukraine with some fighting and shelling, and Kharkiv is under control of Ukraine, this is the latest news, fully under control. Kherson region has lost 3 towns which are close to Crimea. Because Russians want to have water supply to Crimea, and so they try to blow up the dam that is closing the water reservoir, and they have gained control of hydroelectric station there. And the fighting is happening just near my hometown, and people near the hometown were evacuated. It hurts a lot because my mother has been living for 4 days already with this bombing and shelling everywhere, and she spends time in the bomb shelter. She is a pediatrician. When everything started and I called her, it was like 6 a.m. on Thursday this week. She told me, I'm preparing to go to work. I said, maybe you need to think about shelters, not about the work. And she said, it doesn't matter. She is a pediatrician. She said, there are newborn kids there. Then there are kids who stay sick there, and I need to be there. And in 10 minutes, I've heard the same from my aunt. She is a village school teacher. So they both go to work, and my mother spends time in the shelter when there is bombing with the newborn kids. Once she said there were 30 newborn kids, but it's like, it's the situation that you can hardly imagine. For you to understand, you compared Ukraine to Scotland. Ukraine is a very civilized country. We maybe are not rich, and maybe we have some problems with corruption, or maybe, we have some other issues with institutions, but we are a very young democracy, and we are a very civilized country. There are a lot of cities that are good destinations for foreign tourists. We have a very rich culture. We are the country that starts from really long ago, like the beginning of 10th century. Kyiv is actually a super old city, and we are a very peaceful nation. So it was unimaginable to think over that all these troops and planes and helicopters and guns and tanks would come to our land and just start bombing, shelling of civilian infrastructure. It's like all over the east, south, and north of the country. On Thursday, we counted how many districts, regions of the country were damaged by Russia. So on Thursday, Russia attacked 16 regions. Ukraine now has 24 regions plus annexed Crimea. So it's the majority of the regions. And if we thought that the Western Ukraine is secure one, there are cities where Russia bombed military units, TV station, an airport, and some other objects. It was on Thursday. Right now, Western Ukraine is more or less silent, but we hear from time to time that there are paratroopers that try to get there. But you know what we feel like? We feel like that Ukraine is as united ever before, and every Ukrainian is trying to do whatever is possible to fight Russia and to tell the world its story, because Russian disinformation works enormously. As soon as we switch on Russian TV, we hear how they tell to their people that they do not any damage to any civilian infrastructure. For you to understand, yesterday they bombed the most famous, the most known in Ukraine children's hospital. One kid is dead, 2 kids are wounded, and 2 adults are wounded. This is enormous. 2 districts, at least 2 districts in Kiev now are damaged, and these are residential districts. So these are just residential houses with many stores, and there are wounded people. I was shocked that there are no dead people, killed people, but it happened that Kiev was well prepared with shelters and people, and there are a lot of sirens, so people just hide in the metro stations and in the bomb shelters. When we were in Kiev, of course, we made our plan what to do, and first thing was to find the shelters. So near my home, there were 3 shelters, which was like feeling some kind of security, and you know, at least you knew where to run when something starts. It's there are a lot of fighting. There is a lot of fighting near Kiev, in the outskirts of Kiev, and the stories from there, they are terrible. Like small towns, villages, live in the houses destroyed, cars destroyed. They flee to some places that feel secure, you know, in Kiev or in other parts of the Kiev outskirts with kids, and of course, many people with kids left for Western Ukraine. And today there is a heavy fighting in the northern part. There are 2 major cities there, Chernihiv and Sumy. So Chernihiv is under control of Ukraine, but Sumy region, the situation is very heavy there. There are a lot of tanks, and they try to go through Sumy to Kiev. But for you to understand, it's not already the war only of Russia, because Belarus is fully joining the situation. Belarus is not a big country, but it's around 700 kilometers or like 550 miles in the border, northern border of Ukraine. And there are 150 military helicopters staying there, troops. And today, that is unbelievable situation. Today, Ukraine hit a missile that was coming from the territory of Belarus to Kiev. Like we stopped this missile and it didn't damage anything. But this means that this missile doesn't come from Russia, it comes from Belarus. President Zelensky just half an hour ago talked to President Lukashenko, so-called President Lukashenko. I don't know the details of this conversation, but I can imagine that President Zelensky was trying to convince Alexander Lukashenko not to go against Ukraine, because this means that we are not fighting only Russia, we are fighting a coalition of Russia and Belarus. And in these terms, like when you imagine already the situation, you need to understand that the support of Western country and all civilized world for us is so crucial. And I don't think that we would make it without all the support. We were very grateful to Boris Johnson. He was one of the first to fully support everything that that he could do, and to send, and Great Britain sent us military support. We remember getting it. We still did not believe we would need it large scale. Germany provided us only yesterday. Until yesterday, Germany was saying that they will give us any humanitarian help or any pharmacy, you know, and there were 5,000 of helmets. But, you know, you cannot fight with helmets against unstoppable army of orcs. So we also are very grateful for you to say we are getting financial support from many countries, but also sanctions were very important. The most important, but we see that this was a ridiculous situation, I must confess. So on Thursday, when Russia started its operation against Ukraine, Russian economy collapsed. It was in the worst situation ever in history. Then on Thursday, sanctions were introduced in the evening, and when we woke up on Friday and looked in our phones, it happened that Russian economy, Russian markets grew 26%. So it means that those sanctions were too mild because, as Bloomberg mentioned, investors were grateful for the West for so mild sanctions. And that's why Ukraine, of course, started demanding to switch Russia from SWIFT system. As I know, all the members of the EU and the USA already agreed for this, but something is going on there, because what we are getting on information that they are gonna ban the SWIFT system only for some banks. If you ban the system for some banks, then they will just work from other, banks. Like, this is one country. If you do not ban the whole system, then they will just have institution to work through. So it's very important to send this message and to make some kind of information pressure. I know our diplomats work hard. What is very good also that we read in Bloomberg, and today we get also different media confirmations that Western leaders decided to sanction the central bank of Russia. It's also super important for us, because this is a very hard instrument to tackle Russian economy. But Ukraine is asking for more. If these two measures, like full ban of SWIFT and sanctions of Central Bank of Russia, won't help, we are asking for a no-fly, which will help us manage the air superiority that Russia has. In fact, there is no any reason that Russia could get to the capital of Kyiv on the first day. Like, no reason for this. You cannot do this going from any part of the country. As you mentioned, it's a large country. It takes a lot of time to move on the ground. So they just used all their air capacities to get as fast as possible, as close as possible, and to get so fast in Kyiv. This is how the situation looks like. In fact, there are more things that are happening with the communication on international arena, and we would be happy, I will be happy now.
Irina, Iuliia, thank you. That was a tremendous summary of the situation. I had a number of questions that I was going to ask you, and you answered them all in the order that I had them written down already. So that's fantastic. That's a great analysis, both of the military situation as you understand it this morning, this afternoon, the situation of civilians remaining in Ukraine at the moment. I was going to ask. I was also going to ask you two other questions, and Sandra, if I may, I'll to tie up that piece. Speaking to Iuliia, Sandra, I will come to you in a moment, I promise. Iuliia, I was interested a little bit at before of the invasion. We were hearing here a great deal from the political leaders of the two regions in eastern Ukraine that have been occupied by Russian forces since 2014. And where there has been an ongoing conflict for the past 8 years. Since the invasion began, we've heard very little from them. But I'm not so bothered. I'm not so interested in that in those particular areas. I am, however, interested in the situation of Ukrainian citizens who are Russian speakers. You were talking about the unity of purpose and the unity that has developed amongst Ukrainian people. However, President Putin has been making a great deal, he says, of the position that native Russian speakers who are Ukrainians have found themselves in. Now, we don't necessarily believe what President Putin has been saying. However, I'm interested from a Ukrainian perspective, what is the situation for native Russian speakers who are Ukrainian citizens, be they in the east of Ukraine or anywhere else in the country?
Thank you so much for this question, because it means so much, to tell the Ukrainian side. Of course, Putin is very sound with his disinformation, and it's a very smart decision not to believe him. Ukraine operates easily Ukrainian and Russian languages, and in fact, this question is very politicized. But if you go to the east, to Donbass, where the conflict has been developing since 2014, you will find that so many Russian people are defending Ukraine. What Russia tries to say with this Ukrainian language conflict and Russian language conflict is that this is not war and not Russian aggression, but this is internal Ukrainian conflict. But it doesn't make any sense. Ukraine is a very peaceful nation. Definitely, we've been the part of the USSR for a long time, and Russian language has been the major language in the USSR. But after we became the independent state 30 years ago, Ukrainian language, of course, started being the major state language in the country. We have around 44% of Ukrainians speaking Russian. I myself from a Russian-speaking region, but I speak Ukrainian, it's my native language, and I know Russian very well. Sometimes I'm making mistakes, so I'm not very proud of Russian language knowledge. Like I don't know it as well as Russian famous poets, for instance, Sergei Pushkin or Lermontov, you know.
Yes.
But many of us understand Russian, read Russian, talk Russian. If this question is not politicized, then it would never lead to any conflict. For you to understand, this is a very traditional Russian narrative of Russian propaganda. 30 years ago, Russia entered Moldova, another country in Europe, which is bordering Ukraine, with the same narrative. The conflict there was very short, but also there were Russian troops, there were tanks, and also some shelling. And they said that they came to Moldova to defend Russian-speaking people. Actually, the same was in Georgia when they started the conflict in 2008. So this is just the narrative that Russia tries to use as an instrument to start the conflict. Here in Ukraine, after the invasion, was a joke that Russia is very unlucky with neighbors. First, Moldova attacked Moldova, then Georgia attacked Georgia, then Ukraine attacked Ukraine. You know, I mean, we are the third country already whose territories were occupied or annexed illegally. And on the third time, all the world understands that it doesn't make sense. Georgians know Russian, but they speak Georgian. Moldovans speak their language, but they also know Russian, right? And many people in this part of the world know one of the 8 UN languages, which is Russian. But it doesn't make any conflict in the country. Of course, all these sayings of Putin that we are the country of nationalists, radicals, and Nazi, it doesn't make any sense. I was listening to Russian TV, and I'm shocked with every word what is said there. They say that some Ukrainian radicals try to attack Kuban, which is the region of Russia. And these are just the legends that are made up for Russian people to believe that their country is trying to do something good. But there is nothing good into occupying, into killing, into criminal cases, into, you know, making a huge let's say, злочини, conflicts, okay, let's say military conflicts.
Mhm.
So this is the largest war in Europe since the Second World War. We are afraid of what's gonna happen next. We do not know when it's gonna happen, but what for sure we know that we are gonna stand here till the very end. Me and the people that I brought from Kiev, they do not want to leave the country at all. And if as soon as I can get into Kiev, because it's very difficult now to get there, or I'll try to do this, but we would like to be safe to drink, and I don't think that there is any heroism on dying or putting our risks at life, risks at death, if we, you know, can do anything else in the country.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Does it
Iuliia.
make sense?
I'll let you catch your breath just now and catch up. Thank you for that analysis and that explanation of so many aspects so quickly of the conflict that we are watching in abject horror from Scotland and from the UK. Sandra, coming to you now. First of all, I'll ask you the same question that I asked Iuliia. Who are you thinking about this afternoon?
I'm thinking about obviously the people in Ukraine, but the net is actually wider, as Yulia has said. You've got Belarus, Estonia. I know very well. I've been there on a number of occasions. My big worry is that it does escalate. But just to come in on what Yulia said in regards to the language situation, we have lived with this in the UK, in certain parts of the UK. It's a classic divide and conquer. It may not be language in some aspects, or it was in Scotland to an extent, but there's a classic case of divide and conquer, and Britain has been a master of that for many, many years. So my thoughts, looking at the past, it has happened before, and Putin is just reenacting what Britain has done, and not just here in the UK, but in India, Pakistan, many, many countries, pit one against another, regardless of whether it's language, religion, or tribal, and basically it's a divide and conquer. It is propaganda. But my thoughts go to the citizens, and I'm really in awe of the bravery of the citizens who are standing up against Putin. Although having saw, and I don't know if it's if basically some of the media coverage that we see is real or not, but an awful lot of these Russian soldiers, for what I've seen, are just young men who say they were just going on a training, exercise. So I feel for anyone who basically is involved in this war, and I think we must remember, and I certainly think this is the case. This isn't just a knee-jerk reaction from Putin. This has been, planned, plotted. Hopefully it will be the downfall of Putin, having seen the Russian people out in the streets as well. But I think we must remember also the part that the UK plays in this, and they should be thinking, the Westminster government in particular. I read an article which called London the Moscow on the Thames, it was called, because of the amount of Russian oligarchs, millionaires, who were putting money through, dirty money through there. So I think there's a lot to answer there. And I'm thinking of the people who have suffered through the inactions of the Tory government, allowing these people to get a golden visa to come into the UK, allowing them to actually own two newspapers and a TV station, in the House of Lords also, and owning a huge Chelsea football club. They should be absolutely ashamed of the hypocrisy by saying they're sanctioning them, which Boris Johnson and other Tory MPs have received money, and the Tory party, from these oligarchs. So I understand what Iuliia is saying about Boris Johnson coming in that respect, but for me, it's absolute sheer hypocrisy when you allow these oligarchs to flood London. I mean, London has just been a clearinghouse for the illicit monies that came in from the Russian oligarchs. And I think that has to be put forward more and more. I must admit, apart from politicians, particularly the Tory party, I think you need to look at the media also. A few exceptions, I will admit, but when you have people on the BBC, Question Time, like Farage, Aaron Banks, who support Putin, this has been long time planning. It may not look like that now, but it's been long time planning. And basically, that money and the input that they've got in the House of Lords and various other aspects of the Tory government has not been for just nothing. It's not just happened. There's been a plan there. So my thoughts are absolutely with the ordinary citizens and all of the people of the Ukraine, and the fact that we in Scotland want to bring people over here. We want to do that, and we can't do it because of the fact that Priti Patel and the immigration bill will not allow us to bring them through. So I would appeal to maybe Iuliia and others as well to bring that part forward, regardless of what sanctions Boris Johnson or the Westminster government has put forward. This is the most important thing. We need to help these people and we need to give them sanctuary. So get rid of any visa exemptions, get rid of that and welcome these people in with open arms and stop these oligarchs, basically any of these ambassadors, the one with the monies, take the money off them, throw them out the country. That's the only way we're going to do anything.
Absolutely, Sandra. Thank you. Whilst as I said in the introduction, you're now lucky enough to be retired from day-to-day politics in Scotland. But by the same token, you will have a wide and deep network of connections and both amongst former constituents and politically. And so, what are you hearing from people in Scotland? What are the perceptions and what is the reaction that you're hearing from your contacts and from our ordinary Scot? There are no ordinary Scots.
Well,
From the
has been
Scots people in the
demonstrations,
streets.
obviously. Sorry.
Yep. So
Was
what are
that
you
from
hearing from
me,
people on
Andrew?
the streets?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Please, Sandra.
There has been demonstration, obviously, in Edinburgh, in Glasgow, and other cities and areas in Scotland. There have been calls for donations. In fact, I think there's a truck going out to basically tomorrow, I understand. People have been asked to put in, various food stuff, etc. It might not be foodstuffs, but whatever can help the Ukrainian people. So we're doing our best on that aspect of it. We're also obviously asking, that the visas, people are allowed to come in, contact-wise, from MPs, MSPs, and others, church leaders, etc. We're all saying this cannot be allowed to happen. We have to make sure that we give the Ukrainian people sanctuary, and there will continue to be truckloads going out with help, but it should never have came to that. They've known about it for all these years. Crimea was a tipping point, and this is not just the Westminster government. I know you're talking me come on to the EU and etc. But some of these, well, I think a lot of these people are culpable of what they allowed to happen without reacting to it. They're reacting to it now. They've known about it for years, and now we have to react to try and help the people of Ukraine. And as I said before, and I think Iuliia mentioned it, well, I've been in Belarus as well, but Estonia is one that I know mostly, and I was there after the Russians had been there. Proud people, and they showed me the bullet holes and where people had been kept prisoner, etc., etc. These people are Democrats. They're European. They want to stay European, as does many other countries in the Ukraine as well. And we should not be allowing this to happen, or shouldn't have allowed Putin to get as far as this, because basically we've known about it for years. And NATO, well, maybe we'll go on to them as well, and the United Nations too. There's an awful lot of talk, but not an awful lot of action.
Absolutely, Sandra. And one other Scottish aspect I wanted to ask you about, and then we'll talk with Iuliia and you more focused on sanctions. But one aspect that crossed my mind this morning is that with the disruption of energy supplies to Europe as a result of the war in Ukraine, and also there will undoubtedly will be supply chain disruptions now that Ukraine is a war zone. Not forgetting that Ukraine is the third largest producer of wheat on the planet. Are you hearing anything from Scots who you're talking to that they are beginning to see or are beginning to feel the impact when we're already in a cost of living crisis, that the war in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, is going to further increase the cost of heating in Scotland, and is likely to further increase the cost of food as well? Is there any sense that this conflict, that this invasion is going to have a direct effect in the pockets of Scottish people?
There's no doubt there is. There's already been talk of the fact that energy, basically, costs will increase. But, I think we've got to remember these energy companies made billions of pounds of profits. And that's that's crucial to the fact. Obviously, we've got the energy going up apart from what's happening in Ukraine and Eastern Europe as well. And yet they still made billions. And this is the whole crux of the EU, and also obviously in Scotland as well. is that because Russia supplies most of the gas, they are terrified to move because they need that gas so much. And I find that hypocritical as well, basically. And for Scotland, yes, certainly prices of food will go up, they're already going up, prices of energy will go up, but why doesn't a government put a cap on the profits that these energy companies make? Because basically they're making billions of pounds whilst people are either saying we either eat or we heat, and in some cases they're not going to be able to. So I think we need to get that across as well, that it's not just Ukraine and other countries that I've mentioned who have been affected by this situation with Putin. It will have a knock-on effect on how we in Scotland and the rest of Europe will be affected by it. But I go back to what I said previously. They have known about this situation. We have been infiltrated in the UK and the Westminster government by the Tories getting monies from these oligarchs. This has been known and nothing was done. And that's when I find the sheer hypocrisy of the Western world, if you might want to say, but closer to home, the Westminster government. Yeah, good, fly a flag and say we support Ukraine, but don't give sanctuary to the people from Ukraine. Sheer hypocrisy. Let's, not kid ourselves on. It will cost us more money, but let's get real about this and let's say to these but let's cap these energy companies. Let's put a tax on them, and that money goes back into the people's pockets, not into these energy companies or oligarchs' pockets as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sandra. We've been speaking regularly on Broadcasting Scotland about what we see as the hypocrisy from Westminster. Not least, we hear statements from Prime Minister Boris Johnson saying that we should be defending the rights of the Ukrainian people to have self-determination, whilst in the same breath, he continues on a weekly basis to deny the rights of self-determination to the people of Scotland. But we're not here to talk about Westminster politics today particularly, so we will move on a little bit. Thank you, Sandra. Iuliia, when we were listening to you a little while ago, you were talking about sanctions, and in particular, I think the words you used were too mild, and you were telling us about what you could see in terms of the way in which Russian financial markets bounced after the first announcements of sanctions, and then rebounded and recovered. So, from your perspective, what additional sanctions, what more sanctions do you think that the UK and the EU and the West and the world should be applying to Russia now?
Well, thank you. I have mentioned already SWIFT banning from Russia banning from the SWIFT system fully, completely, not just some banks. I've mentioned already the sanctions for the central bank. But also, if you talk about energy is another instrument that Russia uses to blackmail the whole world. And the European Union and Great Britain and other countries of Europe actually have quite strong institutions to think about how to avoid this blackmail with becoming more independent. We are really very grateful to Germany that they banned the start of work of Nord Stream 2 right now, but we were asking for this like for so long. This is a great work of our diplomats and of course of the President Zelensky, and but we're trying to tell about this for such a long time. Russia starts blackmailing, but it does not mean that it will deliver what it promises. So as soon as Nord Stream 2 was suspended, heard from Russia, I think ex-Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, that Russia will make gas for 2,000 euros for Europe, which means that Russia is going to attack with energy very aggressively. But Europe has been in the energy crisis for several months already, and I guess that the best case would be not to ban under Russia, not to try to provide them what they want for the blackmail. It's like, implementing the desires of terrorists. So it's Europe should think about the of its energy supplies from more reliable countries, and of course what your speaker have mentioned, sanctioning the energy companies of Russia would be also a huge hit for Russian economy and for Russian ability to influence countries around the world.
Absolutely. Thank you, Iuliia. And Sandra, turning to you, thinking again about sanctions and economic actions that could be taken. As we know, over the weekend, the cargo ship, the Baltic Leader, which is owned by a Russian bank and which was transporting motor vehicles to St. Petersburg, it was detained by the French authorities and taken to the port of Boulogne. The French authorities pointing to the fact that the bank that owns the vessel is subject to US sanctions. We also know that the NS Champion, which is a gas tanker, was scheduled to dock at the Flotta oil terminal in Orkney on this coming Tuesday, and the NS Champion is owned by Sovcomflot, which is the Russian government. Do you think that we should be that the UK and Europe should be taking further, more direct action with regard to assets such as vessels and their cargoes? And in particular, do you think we should be, in the same way as we've banned flights from Russia, we should be banning vessels from Russia? Or on the other hand, should we be allowing these vessels to continue to move, but should we be detaining them and seizing them as a demonstration that Russia and the Russian economy is moving to pariah status, which will not be tolerated?
I admire the French for what they've done as well. Absolutely. I think we should be seizing them and detaining them. After all, they have declared war. Putin has said it. We should be doing that. There should be no fly zones at all. They shouldn't be allowed to fly over anywhere, any Russian planes. I know there's been a tit for tat on with that. No British ones there, no Russian ones here. But we have to make sure that we sanction everything that they do. As Julia had said, SWIFT as well in the Russian Central Bank, the energy companies. But absolutely, they should not be allowed to be, ships or any form of transport which they are making money of and that are owned by the Russian government or Russian oligarchs as well. We have to be really tough with the sanctions, and I would certainly say absolutely seize them and keep them in port, the ships, and I think that tells Russia something. I don't know what Iuliia thinks of Putin. Basically, I think he's, use a Scottish one, lost the plot in a certain way, having watched his TV performance recently there. But as I said previously, this planning has been going on for a while, and people in the know and governments have known that this is happening. How can you infiltrate a whole government? How can you have, infiltrate enough to basically change election results? This has been known for years, and only some decent journalists have actually brought this forward. And, I wouldn't shy away from saying about the BBC, when you hear the reporting, they certainly, brought Farage and Aaron Banks on as well, who are known supporters of Putin. So, yeah, absolutely, take these vessels, import them, don't let no fly zones, but let's get some transparency. The report, Leveson report, that's, we haven't even seen the whole of that yet. And here we are in the middle of a terrible situation for Julia and her people in the Ukraine, but also for the rest of Europe as well. And I think they really need to take it very seriously that this can affect the whole of Europe. So we all must work together. And I think we have to get the BBC on board to basically tell the truth of what's been happening in Westminster and just how much money has passed over and how many people have had the golden visas and basically been able to infiltrate a Westminster government and the House of Lords as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandra. Iuliia, returning to you now, we heard Sandra mention there the prospect of some form of no-fly zone, but and that's a part of what I was going to ask you. As we begin to think about what is next, we've spent the last 44 minutes talking about where we are at the moment. But in terms of what is next, you have mentioned that over the weekend a cruise missile was launched from a Russian aircraft which had flown from Belarus, and thankfully that cruise missile was shot down by the Ukrainian defences. We know this week that we've seen for the last 2 weeks that the self-proclaimed head of state, I'm not going to call him President, Lukashenko, has been attempting to attach himself very closely to President Putin. And at the same time, we're aware that he is promoting some form of a referendum in Belarus, which is underway just now, in terms of potentially making changes to the Belarus constitution, including hosting Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus. There is that component in terms of a no-fly zone, and a no-fly zone being imposed in Ukrainian airspace by NATO. That is something that is that some people are asking why it's not happening already. And of course, we know that NATO and NATO members have been very clear that they will not interfere militarily in what happens in Ukraine. And my personal fear is that a no-fly zone will not happen until there is some significant loss of civilian life in Ukraine, and then it will be imposed, again, as you were saying, too late. But as you also said, we've seen repeated military actions by the Russian government in Moldova, in Donbass, in Georgia, and now across Ukraine. What do you think are the risks of the escalation of the current conflict, both escalation in Ukraine and then escalation further across Europe?
Thank you for writing this topic, because this is exactly what needs to. I think that many European leaders, many Western leaders, let's say so, underestimated Putin's intention. Putin has developed as a very strong dictator of 140 million population country, and he definitely wants to expand. You know, if people know Russian, and if people do not have such a gap with post-Soviet space, they would probably understand more of psychology, and they can listen what Putin says. He had this absolutely disastrous speech for 55 minutes on history of post-Soviet space and the world before he recognized created by self-proclaimed republics in our Ukrainian Donbass territory. When he talked, he is angry with Ukraine, but Putin does not consider Ukraine to be a subject. He considers Ukraine to be an object, and he talks to European leaders about this object. And then in the second half of his speech, he was absolutely super angry with NATO and with the Western order. So when Putin talks about his intentions, he really doesn't mean only Ukraine. When you talk that there is a risk that NATO somehow can be involved in defeating Ukraine, then it means we will put the condition to see the scenario if Russia actually will go against NATO. So the issue is, if Russia does not want to go against NATO, then they will not attack Ukraine from their planes anymore, or helicopters or drones. But the issue is, if the world gives up Ukraine, the biggest democracy on post-Soviet space, then it will show to Putin that he can go against any other country. And of course, the UK is quite far, and of course it's very strong. But Poland, Moldova, Baltic states, Finland, they are pretty concerned about it, because they know that appetite of Russian empire is enormous. I wouldn't love to talk about the world war, right? Because people can think it's some conspiracy, and I wouldn't like to imagine even if this war is nuclear war. But this is like, we say, a monkey with grenade. So Putin does not feel any limitations. The audience just needs to understand that for Ukrainians to see tanks and through country on the streets and to hide from sirens and to see bombs and shelling is the same strange as for the inhabitants population of Scotland, other part of the UK. Imagine that it's happening in your country. So if you do not stop, if you do not help us stop them here, then where will Putin's limit? And Putin also is doing the things that we can easily compare to Hitler's thing. Again, this metaphor is absolutely proved. If you read the beginning of Mein Kampf, written by Hitler, he was justifying the war when the population would need some resources. He said that he wanted to unite Germans, and then he says that if they do not have enough resources to live, then we can easily go to another war. Isn't it what's happening right now in Ukraine? 8 years ago, Putin annexed Crimea, and Crimea in many ways is dependent on Ukraine. So when he saw that he doesn't have enough resources, he just entered Ukraine from Kherson region and started bombing, shelling, killing, etc., etc., just to get the water supplies, the electricity supplies, and everything he needs for Crimea. That's why the situation in Kherson region is one of the worst situations in Ukraine. I don't think that Westerners right now need to think about this war as the war that is not related to them, because right now it's time to understand this is intention of Putin to destroy the world order that the West has created after the Second World War. And listening to Putin, we understand that he will make up any reason to move forward with any of his intention. This is the concern for the whole world.
Absolutely. Thank you, Iuliia. Sandra, I've got one question for you. We were talking a moment ago about what else should be being done. And to bring it a little bit back to SNP politics, Ian Blackford, the SNP's Westminster leader, is saying that hour by hour the unfolding events in Ukraine become increasingly more desperate and disturbing, and we must act without hesitation. Russia must face the full force of sanctions. While I welcome the measures imposed so far, the UK government has not acted quickly enough or decisively enough. There is still much more the UK must do economically, diplomatically and culturally, including kicking out the Russian ambassador immediately. While working with the international community and imposing ever-tightening restrictions on Russia, it is imperative we send the strongest possible message that Putin's act of war cannot and will not be tolerated. The Russian ambassador's continued presence on British soil is an insult to the people of Ukraine. Allowing Putin's puppet to remain in London on the premise of keeping open communications with Moscow is futile when Putin clearly is not ready to listen. Sandra, what's your reaction to Ian Blackford's demands that the Russian ambassador be expelled, and by implication that the Russian consul in Edinburgh is also expelled?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've almost said that, Andrew, in some of my comments. Absolutely, we can't just tinker around the edges here. Yeah, they should be expelled. It happens in other countries when this type of thing happens, even less in this. But, we've had experience of poisonings, people being killed in the UK, Russian agents. We've known what's going on. We can't just pussyfoot around. We have absolutely got to expel these people, take their assets, no fly zones. But I do have concerns about the Western world per se. Iuliia mentioned the energy and the gas, and I mentioned it also as well. And you sometimes think like the EU and NATO, I'm not saying they don't have the convictions, but there is something far wrong when this type of thing can happen. An invasion into an independent country can happen in 21st century, and yet we have these so-called checks and balances, and it still happens. And that is my worry. I don't know how we get round that. I've been critical of the UN and NATO in the past in regards to their inaction, and I think we have to, whilst looking obviously at what's happening absolutely right now, for the future, even just next week or Europe or whatever, we need to question the role of NATO and the role of the United Nations and how this can be allowed to happen in Russia, will happen from Russia, and in the eastern states and the Baltic states as well. That's where I would like to see more investigation into, because we can do the sanctions, we can do everything in our power, and please God, I hope that it works and Russia pulls out of Ukraine and there's no more fatalities. But if that happens and he goes, there'll be another dictator who'll take his place. So we really need to look at the so-called world order, I think that was mentioned, and exactly what they're prepared to do to stop this happening again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandra. And Iuliia, yeah, you were mentioning Mein Kampf there, and I was going, in terms of thinking about what may happen, I was going to ask you about what Putin's plan was. Would he reinstall Yanukovych, or thinking of the events from the Second War, would he be more likely to install an Erich Koch or a Fritz Sauckel into Ukraine? However, I'm not going to do that, because I'd like this conversation to draw to a conclusion on a more constructive and informative note than dwelling on matters which inevitably put dread into the hearts and minds of everybody. So you worked closely with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for a number of years. I think it's fair to say that in the West we have seen a transformation, both in standing and in stature, of President Zelensky as this war as this invasion has unfolded, and that he is impressing politicians and people across the Ukraine. So I was going to ask you, what do you think has transformed the Ukrainian president from a law graduate to a television producer and an entertainer, and transformed him into a wartime leader and a politician who, no matter his height, he appears to be standing head and shoulders above most European and world leaders at the moment? What has transformed him?
Yeah, I've been working with the President Zelensky for 2 years, and I must confess that he was definitely of a super hardworking person who takes responsibility, and getting more involved in political world and understanding more what's going on internationally and inside the country. He definitely was taking this responsibility. It is very important to remind that he stayed with the Ukrainians in Kiev back at the night when Russia attacked Kiev, and when Washington suggesting to help Volodymyr Zelensky to leave the country. But he said that I will stay there till the very end. There is a very short situation when we were working with him together. He said that he's going to leave the sinking ship. He will be the last to leave the sinking ship. And he didn't have any cameras, and he didn't need to act at that moment. That was actually what he meant. So this is the type of person he is, and he takes responsibility as a true leader when there is a big problem. But if you look at his presidentship, you will understand it's quite a difficult thing. First, he had huge international scandals together with the previous president of the United States. Then he had coronavirus hitting the country. Now he has war. So these challenges probably were helping to grow, but at the same time, the growing responsibility. And that's what makes Ukrainians respect their president in this difficult time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Iuliia. Your insight into someone who is now very clearly on the world stage and is clearly fulfilling that role with some considerable success in such difficult circumstances is very insightful. Thank you. However, looking at the clock, that was our final item for discussion this afternoon. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the financial support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us financially, and we would really like you to support us financially, please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland, and you will see the address and you will see the link to do that on your screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, thank you very much indeed to Iuliia for joining us from Ukraine, and to Sandra for joining us from nearer at home in Glasgow. Thank you both for your time and your contributions to the Full Scottish today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope that you've enjoyed a tasty Full Scottish with us today. We will be here again tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock with Scotland at 7. Meantime, I'll leave you with a question that I know was on President Zelensky's lips, and that is, has the world forgotten the mistakes of the 20th century? Meantime, please keep warm and keep well. Bye-bye.